Watercolor painting looks almost effortless from the outside. A brush touches paper, color spreads, and within seconds a sky, a flower, or a landscape begins to appear. But the simplicity is misleading. Watercolor is one of the most sensitive painting methods because the artist is not only controlling pigment. They are controlling water, how much is on the brush, how much is already in the paper, how quickly it moves, and how fast it dries. That is why watercolor can feel delicate, luminous, and spontaneous, but also difficult to correct. The medium is built around a partnership between intention and accident. The artist guides the flow, but the water always has a voice. At its core, watercolor is paint made from pigments suspended in a water-based solution. The word can describe both the medium itself and the artwork created with it. The French term aquarelle comes from a root meaning water, which captures the entire logic of the technique. Water activates the paint, carries the color, changes its strength, and determines how it settles. Add more water, and the pigment becomes a pale transparent wash. Use less water, and the mark becomes stronger and more concentrated. Unlike oil or acrylic painting, watercolor usually depends on the brightness of the paper below it. The artist often does not paint the light. They leave space for it. Transparency is the defining feature of traditional watercolor. In a transparent wash, pigment particles form a thin layer while the paper remains visible underneath. Light passes through the color, reflects off the paper, and comes back through the pigment to the viewer. This creates the glowing effect that makes watercolor so distinctive. A blue wash over white paper can feel like atmosphere rather than a flat painted surface. But transparency also creates pressure. If a section becomes too dark or muddy, it cannot always be covered cleanly. Watercolor asks the artist to plan ahead, preserving highlights and building depth through layers instead of hiding mistakes under heavy paint. The paint itself is a small chemistry lesson. Watercolor usually contains pigment for color, a binder such as gum arabic to help that pigment stick to the surface, and humectants such as glycerin to keep the paint workable. These ingredients form the paste found in tubes or the dried cakes found in pans. The quality of the pigment matters enormously. Professional watercolor often has a higher pigment concentration, which means it can be diluted with plenty of water while still keeping intensity. A weaker paint may look acceptable when thick, but fade into dullness when spread into a wash. In watercolor, strength is not only about darkness. It is about how much color survives dilution. Paper is not just a background in watercolor. It is part of the painting system. The conventional support is watercolor paper, which is designed to handle moisture better than ordinary paper. Many high-quality watercolor papers are made partly or entirely from cotton. Cotton fibers give the sheet strength, texture, and stability, helping it resist distortion when wet. This matters because watercolor techniques often involve soaking, layering, lifting, and re-wetting. A weak paper may buckle, tear, or absorb pigment unevenly. A good paper allows the water to move while still giving the artist enough control. In this medium, the surface determines whether the paint sings or collapses. Different watercolor papers produce different visual results. Cold-pressed paper is one of the most common choices because it has a moderate texture. That texture catches pigment in tiny irregularities, creating lively washes and natural-looking surfaces. Hot-pressed paper is smoother, making it useful for fine lines, botanical detail, lettering, or precise illustration. Rough paper has a more dramatic texture, causing pigment to collect on raised areas and skip over lower ones, which can create sparkle and grain. The same color and brushstroke can look controlled, soft, broken, or atmospheric depending on the paper. Watercolor is therefore not only about what the artist paints, but what the surface allows. Although paper is the usual support, watercolor has appeared on many other materials. Artists have used stone, ivory, silk, reed, papyrus, bark papers, vellum, leather, fabric, wood, plastic, and specially prepared watercolor canvas. Each surface changes the behavior of the paint. Silk may let color spread with softness. Ivory historically supported tiny detailed miniatures. Vellum can hold precise marks but demands a careful touch. Watercolor canvas requires a special coating so the paint can adhere properly. These variations show that watercolor is not defined by paper alone. It is defined by a relationship, pigment, binder, water, and a surface that receives them in a particular way. Watercolor is usually associated with transparency, but artists have also made it opaque by adding Chinese white. This creates a heavier, covering effect, closer in spirit to body color or gouache. In the 19th century English tradition, that choice was controversial. Some critics argued that opaque editions were not true watercolor because they blocked the shining paper beneath. By around 1880, the argument had mostly faded, and artists used transparent or opaque effects according to their needs. The debate matters because it reveals what people valued in watercolor: the glow, the restraint, the clean paper, and the feeling that color is suspended in light rather than laid on like a wall. Watercolor is ancient, possibly connected to the earliest forms of painting itself. Long before modern tubes and manufactured papers, artists mixed pigments with water and applied them to available surfaces. In East Asia, water-based painting with inks developed into major traditions of brush painting and scroll painting. Chinese, Korean, and Japanese artists often used black or brown ink in subtle variations, proving that a limited palette could still suggest depth, weather, mountains, trees, and emotion. India, Ethiopia, and other regions also developed long watercolor traditions. So watercolor should not be seen as a narrow European invention. It is part of a much wider human habit, making images by letting water carry color. In Western art, watercolor was often treated as a practical tool before it was widely respected as a finished art form. Artists used it for sketches, travel records, studies, and preparations for oil paintings or engravings. It was portable, quick to set up, and ideal for capturing a scene before the light changed. A painter could record the color of a landscape, the shape of a building, or the atmosphere of a place, then later turn that study into a more formal work. Until the end of the 18th century, many watercolors were called tinted drawings. That phrase shows their status, useful and refined, but still considered closer to drawing than major painting. From the later 18th century, finished watercolors became increasingly important, especially in England. The medium suited subjects that were gaining cultural attention: landscapes, ruins, travel views, weather, gardens, and everyday scenes observed with freshness. Watercolor could capture mist, rain, distance, and changing light with a speed and delicacy that heavier paint sometimes struggled to match. Artists learned to use layered washes, reserved whites, soft edges, and controlled blooms as expressive tools. As collectors and exhibitions gave watercolor more attention, it began to move beyond preparation and documentation. It became a complete artistic language with its own standards, pleasures, and difficulties. The rise of high-quality color lithography by the end of the 19th century helped spread the watercolor look even further. Reproductive prints made watercolor landscapes and still lives available to broader audiences, not only private collectors. That popularity makes sense. Watercolor has a visual gentleness that fits domestic spaces, books, travel albums, and scenes of natural beauty. But reproductions also remind us what makes an original watercolor special. Every edge, bloom, stain, and transparent layer records timing. A few seconds can change the result. Too much water, and the color floods. Too little, and the wash dies. Watercolor endures because it turns limitation into beauty, fragile materials, simple ingredients, and the unpredictable movement of water becoming light. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.